Welcome back to the Daily Dose, friends. You know what it is today? It's day number 100. Day number 100. That is so cool. We are on day number 100. We have made it through 100 consecutive days. So thank you for joining me as we go through this journey. On our 100th day of our daily Bible reading plan, we're looking at Psalm number 100, and we're looking at 1 Kings 20 through 22. So where we open up in 1 Kings today, a guy that we've mentioned before, Ben-Hadad or Ben-Hadad, he attacks Samaria, okay? So now, if you remember, Ben-Hadad was the king of Aram. Him and 32 kings are going to basically besiege Samaria. Ben-Hadad and Ahab argue back and forth. Now remember, Ahab was the king of Israel up in the north for a time, and he was in the city Samaria. So Ben-Hadad and 32 of the other kings that were of surrounding areas, they decide that they're going to go besiege the city. So over a period of time, Ben-Hadad and Ahab kind of argue back and forth, and they're, shouting demands at each other, and, nobody wants to throw up the white flag. They can't come to an agreement. Ultimately, Ahab kind of defeats Ben-Hadad. So there's a number of battles that take place over a period of time involving these guys. Ahab is relatively victorious for the most part. He's the one that comes up victorious. And in the end, Ahab ends up making a treaty with Ben-Hadad. Then we come to a section where there's a prophet who condemns Ahab. So Elijah has kind of condemned him in the past. Now we read that a prophet meets Ahab somewhere on the road. And this prophet tells him that he should have killed Ben-Hadad instead of, trying to make a treaty. So now Ahab is going to be killed instead. Since Ahab did not take the blood of Ben-Hadad, life would be required of Ahab. So we go on to a story about this dude Naboth and his vineyard. Ahab wants to buy a vineyard, right? The owner of this vineyard refuses. Now, Ahab was the king. I would imagine that he could have started up a vineyard probably anywhere that he wanted to, but he wanted this one specific dude's vineyard for whatever reason. But the owner refuses. So Ahab is like, oh, poor me, oh, the injustice. He goes back home and tells Jezebel, hey, you're not going to believe this. I'm trying to buy this dude's vineyard, and he's not selling it, right? So as we saw earlier, in a previous daily dose, Jezebel seems to be the one who's in charge of the family, and he goes and cries to her, and she decides that that she's going to basically frame the owner. She's going to set the owner up. She's going to get a couple of guys that are going to be false witnesses. They're going to accuse the owner of the vineyard of doing something, and the owner's going to get in trouble, and he'll end up being stoned, right? So that's the plan. That's how it goes down. Jezebel ends up getting this vineyard. Now Elijah shows up and condemns Ahab, and he prophesies of their death, of Jezebel and Ahab. Then we read about this guy named Micaiah, who prophesies against Ahab, right? So there comes a point where there's peace between Aram and Israel. That's the Ben-Hadad and his folks, and then Ahab and his folks. There's peace for about 3 years. In the third year, Jehoshaphat, who at the time was the king of Judah down south, he goes to see Ahab. They decide together that they want to attack this place called Ramoth Gilead, and they pretty much agree to team up, basically. So they go to battle, and we read that someone randomly hits Ahab with an arrow. Somebody just randomly shoots an arrow, and the arrow happens to come down and hits Ahab in between some of his little plates of armor, and it goes into him. And he basically just bleeds out and dies. The next section, we're talking about Jehoshaphat. So now we're kind of refocusing from Israel, the northern kingdom, down to Judah, the southern kingdom again, okay? So this section is about Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. So Jehoshaphat was Asa's son. He took rule in Ahab's 4th year. So when Ahab became king, after he had been king for about 4 years, that was around the time that Jehoshaphat came into play. He was 35 when he took rule, and he reigned for about 25 years. We are told that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And one place where he falls short, though, while he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, he did not tear down the Baal high places, the various high places in the land that had been set up for Baal worship. He did not tear those down. Then we read about Ahaziah. We're switching back over to Israel now. We read about Ahaziah, king of Israel. He was Ahab's son. And we read that, just like his father, like son, that this Ahaziah did great evil in the sight of the Lord. And that's pretty much where our summary is going to stop for today. For our point of interest, I wanted to mention a brief passage out of our psalm for today, and it's a very short psalm, by the way, just a handful of verses. But verses 4 and 5, it says, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name, for the Lord is good and his love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations." So notice it says that we should enter his gates with thanksgiving, that when we approach God, when we come into his presence, when we approach him in meditation, when we approach him in prayer, when we approach him in a corporate place of worship as well, that we should approach his metaphorical gates with thanksgiving. We should always be giving thanks, and that we should approach with praise and with thanksgiving. Those things are very important to the Lord. They're important for us to practice. And then it kind of gives us a follow-up to that, like, hey, why wouldn't you want to approach him with thanksgiving and with praise? For the Lord is good, and his love endures forever. He's worthy of all praise and all thanksgiving and all honor. His faithfulness continues through all generations. So, beloved, as we continue on about our day today, I encourage you to give thanks to the Lord, to give praises to the Lord, and to remember that his love endures forever and his faithfulness continues through all generations. So thank you guys for being here, and until we meet again, deuces.